How many of you guys remember Aaron Campbell back in 2010? So his brother had died that morning. So Aaron was, I think, 28 or 29. This is in January of 2010. Aaron's brother had died in the hospital of cancer or something like that. And so Aaron was pretty distraught. And he went home to his apartment. It was actually in this neighborhood in Sandy. And his girlfriend was pretty concerned about him and his mental state. And apparently he had a gun. And so she was concerned, right? And so she called her aunt. And her aunt called the cops because she was concerned. And so the cops sent out a SWAT unit, you know, beanbag gun, the AR-15, and the negotiation team because they thought, okay, well, this could be a hostage crisis, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't know that his girlfriend and her kids had already left, and so it was just Aaron in the apartment. And, well, Aaron was on the phone with Quackenbush, the crisis negotiator. It was bad reception. And so then they started texting, and Aaron unexpectedly came out of his apartment, right? And the cops that were on the ground, including Frasier, they freaked out as soon as they saw Aaron Campbell. He was only wearing boxer shorts, talking on the phone, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So then they shot him. One of the cops shot him with a beanbag. Aaron reached down and grabbed his back where he had been hit, and then Frasier pulled the trigger and killed him. Because of that, the Department of Justice got involved and said, okay, you guys need to do something about your police response to mental health crises. Because of that, the behavioral health unit was created. Unity? No, behavioral health unit. Okay. So it's an actual police unit that exists. So there are 2 mental health crisis cars in every precinct. So a grand total of 6 in the city. They're supposed to be the ones that show up whenever somebody's having a mental health crisis. And on top of that, they have the enhanced crisis intervention team. So again, instead of having a regular patrol officer show up, you're getting somebody who knows how to deal with people in mental health crises. I think about this a lot, right? Every time I hear somebody having a mental. The problem with the staffing levels that we have right now, and our staffing levels are at 940, this is a total police force, all the sworn officers in the city, is that we don't have enough police to do regular patrols, because that's the core function of the police bureau. We don't have enough cops doing regular patrols. We don't have enough cops staffing the behavioral health units. We don't have enough cops staffing the enhanced crisis intervention team. And so that means the people who are most vulnerable are the ones who are most likely to get shot. There are so many ways for this to go sideways. So I'm always like, okay, make sure you have enough staffing level. So when people call 911, they're getting the right kind of cop to show up at their door. And I think about this because my next door neighbors, John and Jerry, very nice people, knocked on our door on Christmas morning because Jerry was having a mental breakdown. And I thought, okay, well, they have a gun. What happens if the cops show up here? How many ways can this go wrong? So yeah, I want more cops. I don't want to have any more stories coming from people in public housing saying that they called 911 and nobody showed up. I don't want to hear that anymore. There should always be a cop that's showing up when people have an emergency. And it should not be somebody that you're worried about getting shot by.
Now, we had a conversation, as you know, with Joanne last night, and her contention was that cops are not being allocated appropriately. So she's not really in favor of having more cops. She believes that we are putting them in the wrong places.
She wants to assess where they're at right now because she thinks we technically have enough of them. We're just not using them in the right locations.
We have enough, they're just sitting on their butts.
Right.
That was her contention.
Yeah.
I serve on the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. It's a joint city-county function, and the whole idea is that the hardcore homeless who are shooting up in doorways, that they can either go into the criminal justice system or they can go to diversion, right? So, and the primary area for this is downtown, Old Town Chinatown, and a bit of the Lloyd District. We're hoping to expand it. I remember the very first meeting that I went to, I looked around the room and was like, none of these people are downtown people, they're Old Town Chinatown people. They don't even understand the neighborhoods. They don't know that we have 4 different police forces that function in downtown. We have Portland State University, we have the Portland Business Alliance bike cops, who are actually paid for it, by the way. We have Multnomah County Sheriff, and we have Portland Police, right? They detailed the street crimes unit for LEAD. So LEAD is basically like foot patrols, people walking around. Street crimes, their job is to stem the flow of all drugs into the city. They're not a foot patrol. So that meant that while they're having to do the LEAD stuff, they were not doing their job. of stemming the flow of drugs into the city, right? Because they've been reallocated, volunteered. However, there's the Portland Business Alliance bike cops. And so I worked pretty hard behind the scenes. It was like, okay, get these guys on board. Please get these guys on board. And they finally got on board. Now most of the people that are in the LEAD program got there as social contact referrals by the bike cops, because the bike cops are the only ones that patrol that area. So whenever I hear people talking about how we're not reallocating the cops or not being allocated correctly, I'm like, how much time do you spend on this? Because I spend a lot of time on public safety issues. That's the bulk of what I do. And I know where the cops are being allocated to. And I know right now, we don't have basic staffing levels for patrols. And if you can't cover patrols, which is the very basic core function of the police, you're not going to function. You're not going to have foot patrols. You're not going to have street crimes. You're not going to have behavioral health units. You're not going to have enhanced crisis intervention teams. You're missing all of the rest of that. And I know this because this is what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. So speaking of police, and just on this topic, we've been spending some time not only in our neighborhood but other neighborhoods talking with people and neighbors. And there's I've lived here since '96, and there's a bit of situation with the police officers that we're talking with, in addition to the neighbors, where there are people not being detained or arrested for things that many years ago would not fly.
Yep.
So break-ins into homes, people caught and detained, the police get there, the person is sort of let go. We have a problem. I know this is a little bit more state legislature, but we have an issue with cars being stolen. Yep. Actually, some neighbors more than once, because their car is profiled because it's easy to be stolen, taken, dumped, drugs left in it, that type of thing. And we also, just living here, petty crime is very much up. I don't know that I'd call it petty whenever people are breaking in your home, but, you know, property, we have
not
a
murders,
street
but
6 blocks away where, and I mean this, I'm not exaggerating, in a 2-week stretch, there were 3 to 4 cars a week stolen on this stretch, which was like 10 or 12
and that's, I mean,
blocks.
reported.
So I love what you're saying. The police that we're talking with, I'm not seeing the tough, rowdy cops. I'm seeing them saying, please find out who's running. This is why you're here, actually. This is because of these conversations we've been having. And so my question is, what type of things in your studies and looking at things do you see that will enable us to cut back this crime? And before you answer, I said this last night actually, I actually am not concerned with putting more people in jail. I want people to be somewhat deterred to go to jail. And the second part is we have a pretty big drug problem, and it seems that no longer is a problem.
It's a crime.
It's not a crime anymore. You know, shooting heroin type. Yeah. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, and how you see the solution wise us to get back to where we were when, you know, we moved here at around the same time and we were in love with the city.
So there are 3 different angles here. So the first one, this is pretty depressing. We only have 3 jails, and when the jails get to 93% occupancy, they actually send a call out to the cops to let them know not to arrest any more people. And then they start releasing people when they get 95% occupancy.
Yep.
So there actually is a shortage of jail beds. So that's a county issue. I was talking to one of the bike cops in downtown that was handling the park blocks. And we had some really bad camps along the North Park blocks. And he saw a dude show up with a guitar case, right? And the guy flipped open the guitar case and completely filled with all the different drugs. He's just dealing out, right? Yeah. And he called for backup because he's right at the end of his 12-hour shift, right? Because all of the cops right now, because of the staffing shortages, they're all working 60-hour work weeks. Right? He called for backup. His lieutenant showed up and said, let it go.
Yep.
Right.
So that happens at the cop level, and then when they do arrest them, there's something happening at the DOJ level.
It's happening at the county level.
And the county level, right.
So there's actually been some interesting kind of stuff that's happening. So number one, they've reclassed a lot of crimes to make them misdemeanors instead of felonies. Right.
Right.
Because they're trying to reduce I mean, there are
Crime
definitely
stats go down that
disparities
way.
in there.
Mm-hmm.
The state has put more requirements for DAs to be focusing on other kinds of positions. So they're no longer just functioning as DAs. So that means that crimes aren't being charged. And because of the police shortage, the detectives who would normally be investigating these crimes are now doing patrol.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're on patrol, they're not investigating your crimes.
Mm-hmm.
That's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
So you have like failures at every level happening here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when we went in Lentz neighborhood a couple months ago, Mayor Wheeler was there with someone from
From the DA's office.
from the DA's office and someone from the local Mark Wells.
Crime prevention.
Yeah, crime prevention.
And there were also policemen there, and it was interesting to see that almost every single group of that was using the same wording in some way that indicated that our hands are tied. Like the DA's office hands were tied because
They pointed at each other, basically.
they pointed at each other because it was like one of these. Well, we can't arrest people for doing drugs in public anymore because they made a decision that they weren't going to that they weren't going to prosecute people for that anymore.
Yeah, and then
the cops are like, well, we're not going to arrest people like that because they're just going to get released.
Mm-hmm.
And so our hands are tied.
And then the DA says a higher court decided this is not a crime, so we can't prosecute. So it was just this continuum.
And the mayor's office is saying the same thing. It's like, what
Right.
do you want us to
Yes,
do?
and the state decided not to pay for any more judges, and the state also decided not to pay for any more DAs.
Right.
So please tell us you have solutions to all that right now.
And you're going to fix it all.
At least what can we do on the city level?
Yeah, what can we do on this
Obviously,
city level?
You're not running for governor. You're not running for the state legislature. What can be done on the city level to address some of these problems? And what can we do to enable, to empower the citizens in the city to get some
Movement,
action on some of
yeah.
these
So the very first thing that you guys can do, and this actually makes a difference, go down and talk to every person at city council, send them letters. The magic number is 10. If 10 people contact a city council member on an issue, it flips them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's as low as it is. It's just 10 people.
That
we need more
explains a
cops.
lot of things.
The first and foremost, Lieutenant Commander Schaefer was at Commander Schaefer. She was at another public safety meeting that I attended recently, and she said that there's a grand total of 18 cops patrolling at any given time in Central
Yes.
Precinct, and it's actually lower. So if you do the math, that's about 50 cops patrolling the entire city of Portland at any
Yeah.
given time.
We have 2 for like about a 10-mile radius.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Astoria, Oregon has more police coverage
Yes.
than Portland does.
Tillamook has more.
How do we write these letters so that they are effective? Because we go to meetings and we hear people complain about the things that are happening in our neighborhood. And it's like, this is the part of the meeting that you just sit through and listen and nod your head. And it feels like when we say these things, it's not really having an impact, no matter how many of us say it.
Mm-hmm.
So what are
There
we
are
saying?
2
What are we doing
commissioners who
wrong?
voted against having additional police staffing when the police requested 90 new staff positions 2 weeks ago. Commissioner E. Daly and Commissioner Fritz,
Mm-hmm.
they voted against it. Again, I'm going to pound this as hard as I can.
I feel like Hardesty said that was because she felt, because she's friends with those people, she really felt that they, did some backdoor deal type stuff and made decisions without asking the public. She really felt like that was protecting us from spending money just loosely on just 95 cops if we have enough of them already. So that was her contention.
If you believe that we have enough cops, then you wouldn't have to worry about police response times.
Right.
You
Absolutely.
wouldn't have convenience store owners telling the guy that comes in and shoplifts and they're just putting all their stuff in the pants. You
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have the owner saying like, hey, can you just put it back and leave? And they're like, what are you going to do? Call the cops? You know they're not going to show up.
It's so true. You might have an hour.
Yeah.
I was working at a
if you
house.
believe we have enough cops. then
Right.
that wouldn't
No,
be an
I
issue,
don't.
right?
I don't. It's interesting though what they will show up to and just kind of stand around when there's not anything really happening. I do find that interesting, but it's almost like they can't really patrol in some areas. Our neighborhood association in particular is very problematic because they have taken a very firm stance against police and they don't want them patrolling.
They're anti-police.
They're anti-police and fairly effective in making sure that the cops know that they're not welcome here. My neighborhood cop, she sits on the corner and does paperwork over by the church, and she doesn't really patrol. She said it can get really hostile if she shows up. People don't feel safe with her driving through the neighborhood.
You know, in regard to that, Abby, if you don't mind
Mhm.
piggybacking on that,
Yeah.
in our conversation with Joanne last night, a question was asked about police presence in the public schools.
Mhm.
And Joanne said, well, you know, that might work in some schools. You know, some communities feel more comfortable with the police than others.
And then she
so
actually
there's-
outright
so-
said that it's not really safe to have
Right,
them.
and so she was indicating that we need to be careful about putting police presence in places where police are not welcome, or where people have an antagonistic view toward the police. What is your opinion of that? And what do you think needs to change in our communities so that people see the police as their advocates?
Mm-hmm. I have a friend, Dean. He lives in the Peter Paulson, which is it's wet housing. This is your housing first model.
Mhm.
You know, so basically, people who have been treated mental health and addiction issues, especially addiction issues,
Mhm.
get put into the buildings. And right across the street from them was ODOT land, and the camp across the street was a meth camp, and we knew it. You know, they're all dealing meth out of there, and he has a nickname for them. They call them the oogles in the middle of the night. You know, they're dealing directly below his window.
Right.
And he's like, well, what can you do about this? Can you do anything? And it's like, okay, well, why don't you call the cops? And he's like, right now I've got one problem. I call the cops and I've got 2 problems. I'm like, okay, Dean. Well, let me see what I can do. But, you know, it comes back to the whole, when I look at Erin Campbell, I think there should have been protests on the streets. There should have been marches everywhere. There weren't any in Portland. That was one of the most screwed up cases of police brutality that Portland has ever seen. And I can say that as a person who did civil rights history and taught it at Portland State University. I know about the pause and toss, and I know about don't smoke them, choke them. You know, I know what the police did. I used to have my students looking through the records of reports from the police reports and records from the Metropolitan Human Rights Commission, comparing and seeing what was happening with the police and police brutality. I understand these issues, and I think that there is a lot of skittishness. However, Portland's history is not the same as Ferguson's history. It's not the same as Baltimore's history. It's not.
Yeah.
Right. So, and this gets back to what's our priority? Is it keeping people safe, so when people call 911, you have cops showing up? Or is it just to dismantle the police force altogether and say, fend for yourself? Because right now we're fending for ourselves, and look at how well that's working for us.
Yes.
Not
So are you
fantastically.
supportive of the police being in the public schools?
I think that's a judgment call. I'm not sure that I really have a strong answer on that one. I don't like school shootings. But as we saw last week in Parkland, or 2 weeks ago, there were deputies outside the school. And they didn't do anything.
My understanding
They didn't
was that
act,
they
yeah.
received word above them to not go in.
Yeah, but what's the point of having cops in schools?
Mhm.
I mean, what is the priority?
I work at Parkhurst High School just a little bit, and we have 2 officers there for our basketball games, and I think 4 for our football games. And when Grant plays Jeff, he told me they have about 8.
Expecting
And
or is it
I don't
just
know if you know
their fans?
Grant played Jeff the other night out at the house, and anyway, I went up to him, I said, man, I'm glad to see you guys here. Just love having you here, because I think that might be the little bit of overlay, that presence that just says if anybody's going to get weird here, there's somebody
That's watching.
These guys, there's these guys, and I just wanted them to know. I wanted them to know how much I loved them being there. One was down on court side, the other was up at the balcony level.
And how many of them were wearing school colors?
None of them were wearing their.
I think the fact that the deputies didn't do their job is probably not the best reason not to have them there. They probably need the training to do the job that they're
Yeah, some
called
calls
to
to
do.
do. I don't want to ignore people in this other area.
Sarah, do you have a question?
Nope.
Okay.
I'd just like to point something out that I think all of us can kind of relate to. That what we really want is we want to go back to a baseline of order, I guess you can call it that.
Right.
And what we're doing, at least in Brentwood, Darlington, and Lentz, and Park Rose, and in what's the other one? Oh, Gateway. There's those Sergeant Tighe from the East Precinct NRT. He's put together these livability plans. Yeah, and that's something we're going to be doing a lot more of because it's basically. And when you look at it, I read through it again, yesterday after I got done with this meeting, and I reflected on the fact that we're just basically we're having to lobby our authorities to do
what
a
they were supposed to
basic
do.
job. Like, and we're feeling like we're getting this big, huge favor done for us when we're just asking them to get back to a level of livability where, we don't have to have neighborhood watches, where we don't have to have these extraneous measures.
Well, not such an extreme version of it anyway.
Right. Scale it back to where we're not having to worry about needles in the park, people stealing stuff off your front porch and every other darn thing. I mean, I just find it kind of reassuring because I remember, when we met back at the neighborhood association meeting, that in the entire field of candidates, you were the only one that seemed to have a grasp on that aspect of how crucial it is to have the police having a visible presence in neighborhoods. Because, being downtown, you clearly understand that. It is a deterrent. You see a cop, and you're going to think twice before you sell heroin, even if it's, a personal use amount. I find that encouraging, but at the same time, how are you going to convince, or do you have enough, given your experience and what you've seen downtown, do you think that you would be able to sway other commissioners?
Yes.
Okay.
It was a 2-2 vote. Yeah, Saltzman was on that day. It was a 2-2 vote.
That's right. I remember they took advantage of that on a couple different things.
Yeah.
He was gone.
Yeah. It takes 3 votes. And again, this is one of those things where you need to really think about the ramifications. Elections have consequences. We see that with Washington, D.C.
Yep.
I'm not totally down with putting the fun in dysfunction. But this is one of those things where I think that people need to pay attention. Because every candidate has a distinctly different vision of where the city's going.
Right.
And what they think that should be, that direction. And, put this back on people who vote. Like, what do you want as an outcome?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Our experience in the neighborhood is that the city itself is divided in a very dramatic way. There are people who have more of a kind of pragmatic view towards these problems. They want to assess the problem. They want to apply a solution. And then there's a very ideological approach, and they're not going to
They're not
pragmatic.
No, they're not going to work.
They're emotional.
These people hate us.
They hate pragmatism.
And they have all sorts of terrible names for us.
Yes.
So how do you what can you do to
Yeah,
fix
what do we
that?
do to fix the culture of so say there are, and I know there are groups that feel uncomfortable with the police. What do we do to bridge that gap so that people do feel comfortable having police around and know that is a good thing? Or that makes us
live
safer.
Together. We're not on opposite sides, but we're talking like we are.
Yeah, the very first thing is to figure out the common ground.
That's been rough here.
Exceptionally.
When we talk about homelessness, finding the common ground is the one place where I found that people have common ground is understanding that we are the richest country on earth. We are. There's no question. We are the richest country on earth. We control 20% of the entire world's economy.
Yes.
And as soon as we say that tent camping is okay,
Yeah.
we failed.
And that doesn't even go as far as just strictly financially. It really is that we've brought more people out of poverty than any other country in the entire world. Why are we saying it's acceptable to live in a tent and to live like animals? Why are we saying that's acceptable?
And that's the best we can do.
That's not the best we can do.
I know. So this is kind of where it's like, okay, figuring out where that common ground is. And that's the only thing that I found so far in terms of homelessness and having that discussion is to say, okay, look, is this really acceptable?
Is it humane?
Is it humane? Is this really the best we can do?
Yeah.
And as soon as we accept that and say like, okay, this is it, it's like, all right.
It's gonna get worse.
What
Yeah.
kind of going on the property aspect of this? One of the things that got voted on recently and passed was another section of this thing where basically you're punishing
Property owners and
owners and stuff like that if for no cause evictions or if they raise their rents a certain percentage, you have to pay $4,500.
Which seems like there's an alarming amount of support for it.
And rather than looking at the issue at hand, which is like, okay, there's a lack of affordable housing. Well, we're going to make the privileged pay for it, and the privileged can be somebody who has owned a couple homes, and that's their their investment and their retirement, and so part of it is they have someone living there, and maybe a relative needs to move in there, or whatever the situation is, and then these people get get punished for that because
comes
they're
down
the
to-
privileged.
Follow an action through to its logical conclusion. How does this play out in 5 months? How does this play out in 5 years? How does this play out in 15 years?
It's going to reduce. I think it's going to reduce the amount
Of property
units that
owners,
people are going to be willing to rent.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Right.
Bingo.
So
So a lot of the things that are on the rental market now
Yeah.
are going to be gone.
Right.
They're gonna be sold as to private housing.
Right.
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 And because the city council took some very drastic actions last week, it made all the development community skittish.
Yeah.
So that means nobody's going to be building anything.
Right.
And then you have the secondary problem of we still have the problem with the heights.
Yeah.
And the developers, again, they're not going to be building anything because of the inclusionary zoning. So the problem with the inclusionary housing, it gets, so you throw rent control on that, like, okay, we're done.
Yeah, I would never
Yeah.
consider being a landowner.
Yeah. There's a woman that came to our meetings, and she said she was at we had a cocktail hour a couple weeks ago, and she owns 9 properties, something like that. A few are multiple family dwelling, and most of them are single family dwelling, but she's acquired them she's single, and this is like her career, and she's acquired them over the course of years with her real estate business, and so she owns locally. All of her homes are in this general area, and she said this is such a huge discouragement for her because not only will it diminish the amount of diversity between her renters, because she will literally just do word of mouth rentals within people that know people, and it'll all be single women because those are the people that know people like them,
So
and
you
they're
get rid
just
of all the small ones.
and it's not what she wants.
But then you also have the large buildings like the apartment that I live in that's owned by, and it's an investment fund, right? Chicago is like a teacher's investment fund, something like
Right.
that. Those are all going to go condo.
Oh yeah, I mean they have to.
Yeah.
And
No.
she said the property that she owns now, she's really thinking about, okay, so if I sell them off now at their current value, which has gone way up,
Yeah.
and she's like, to some rich Californian, and this is what she said, and she's like, and then I bank that money and earn the interest, I may be just as well, I might just do that. And she said, and I hate that.
Yeah.
I like being a property owner, and I like providing affordable units to people, and she's able to rent for far under market value because she's owned them for so long.
And
And she,
people have lived in her place for over a decade.
yes, she's had people live there 10, 15 years,
Where
and
do
she's
all the
gonna.
local landlords go? We end up with property managers and
Yeah.
these corporate
Big corporations,
relationships.
yeah.
They sell them. Yeah, because what was it? Wall Street? There was another Wall Street investment firm that came into Portland several years ago, and they bought up like 1,000 houses.
Yes, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have this other
I thought it was
additional
2,000, but
problem
maybe it was
that,
1,000.
I see a lot in downtown with the newer buildings. So there's actually 2 things that are happening. One of them, a lot of the apartments that were built in the South Waterfront looks likely that they're going to get converted to condos after 10 years, right?
Right.
And then we also have the secondary problem with a lot of the newer buildings. They're being rented out on Stay Alfred and Airbnb, so entire floors.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what that does is it artificially inflates the rental
Because why would they
prices.
have a permanent renter if that person wants to leave and they have to pay them to leave?
Yeah.
I mean, I can understand that I've owned before, but I didn't rent my place out, and I owned in BC. And then when I moved here, we didn't buy right away. We've just been renting, and I think, well, that would be terrible for my landlord's a good person.
Yeah.
This would be awful if they had to pay me $45. Now, if they were slumlord and they deserved it to some level because they weren't fixing things and I was living in some kind of derelict house, I can understand that. I mean, that's. Oh yeah, I mean, they put you in a position where I have a friend, she's living in Section 8 housing, and the guy that owns it, he's like, he has no motivation to fix things because he's hardly getting anything for the rental. She pays a portion, like $200, and then they pay the other portion, and it's far under market, and he's barely making anything, so he's just not fixing anything.
Well, what we saw in downtown with a lot of the HUD housing, this is in downtown and Northwest. So this is the condo conversion, just killed housing in the central city, low-income housing. That's when it started pushing everybody out because of all the condo conversions. But you had families that bought up a lot of these apartment complexes years ago, and they made them HUD housing, Section 8 housing, because then they could get the government revenue on top of it, right?
Right.
So they weren't losing any money. What happens when the property market in the central city suddenly becomes really valuable, or the property market out here becomes really valuable? Then there's not an incentive anymore to keep it low income. You might as well just sell it off
Yep. Yep.
and make it valuable. And so that's what we're seeing now. But if we have a city council that keeps taking these like crazy actions and not understanding the cumulative
The
effect of them,
ramification. Yeah.
I mean, this is disastrous.
Yeah.
Last week was disastrous.
Yeah.
How do you?
We're so happy you think so.
Yes, that relieves me.
Whoa, like, geez, you know,
Well,
it's
it
like, what were
seems
you
to me, and
thinking?
maybe I don't know. You have more insight than I do because you've dealt with it a lot more downtown. But it seems like they're almost building an industry around the idea of affordable housing,
That's what
but
I-
they're not delivering affordable
Yeah.
housing. They're basically building right at what you could consider marketable. You know, what they call market rate
It's
housing.
marketable
above.
housing.
Above.
Yeah.
Yeah, above. But I mean, when it comes to the people that are on that edge, teetering on the edge of housing stability, they're not going to be able to afford that $1,500.
But what
block.
it does is it forces the rate in buildings like mine, it forces the rent on our buildings down.
Yeah.
So it just gets back to the very basics of supply versus
Yeah.
demand. Increase the supply. And people, when they have a choice and they have the kind of disposable income, they're not going to rent in my building.
Well, right. So
They're gonna rent
I was
in
saying
the
the same thing to a neighbor. I said, nobody's going to rent my house if, like, my house is old and, like, it needs a lot of work. So if new condos got built on my friend's property on 122nd on this crap little lot that there's nothing on there now, it's this, like, terrible little building, but he can't build on it because the fees are just astronomical. But he's like, I want to build some nice condos. I want to sell them for around, like, 80 to 120,000 a piece. He's like, I don't want to make, a ton of money, but I want to give places for people to live. Well, then they won't live in houses like mine.
Yeah.
Because they'll choose places like that because they don't want to live with a bunch of people. They want to live alone.
But
Yeah,
that's-
this is-
but
And then
that's
it
the
makes
thing,
my house cheaper.
We're choking down development.
We are.
Right.
And because of that, we don't have this phenomenon of people
Right.
Yeah.
moving up.
Well, the inclusionary housing, what happened is after that took effect on, February 1st, 2017, and the number of new proposals that came through after February 1st, 2017, there was a backlog. I mean, they just, pushed them through as quickly as they could. I think since then, there's only been, 12 proposals.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to allude to.
Yeah.
They're trying to rush to beat that inclusionary
Yeah.
zoning restriction, and now there's just there's nothing. It's a drought.
Yeah.
There's nobody wanting to fill that void, which is growing.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
it's another. I see it as a reverse bubble. Like things are going to implode extremely badly and cause an already bad situation to exacerbate even
Far
worse
worse.
when there's even less supply for it to go around for the people that really need it.
Yeah, so now all the buildings that are going in are hotels.
Right.
I mean, I must have 25 hotels going online in my neighborhood within the next year.
That's
It's not
nuts.
Housing.
I didn't
It's
realize
ridiculous. I mean, it's
That's
ludicrous.
crazy.
Every new proposal that we get is like a hotel or a hotel office combo.
Wow.
Which pros and cons. A lot of old public housing are hotels, so then
Sure. Sure.
it makes it easier to purchase some of these old budget hotels and turn them into transitional housing, which is a good thing. Because when you look at Interstate Avenue, that's nothing but just old.
Oh, yeah.
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 Along Sandy as well, along Barber Boulevard. So that could be a net positive thing in terms of it'll depress the hotel room rates, and so hotels won't be quite as popular.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, you're still not building the missing middle
We have this
housing.
huge missing piece.
We do.
Yeah.
And part of the challenge is that we've put all of the pressure on the private development community to supply housing. And this is a racket. I have to tell you about this because this is just an incredible racket. So right now it's based on median family income of the zip code, right?
What?
So when you see something that's set up for this unit is available for people making 60% of the median family income of this area. So guess what the median family income of the Pearl District